before, I would like to welcome in video, live and in person, Dr. Kim Holloway, Vice Provost for Research Development at Northeastern University, and Adam Kinnear, a doctoral candidate at Marquette University. They both have unique insight into the operations that underpin the pathways into the research workforce and the importance of the strong partnership between federal research agencies and our research universities. So we'll begin with a few remarks from our panelists on this topic, and I will first turn it over to Dr. Holloway. Dr. Holloway, take it away.
Thanks, Reba. I'm going to try and share my slides. Hopefully that will work in our session. Can you see my slides? Fabulous. Fantastic. So I was asked today, and thank you for saying I'm early in my career. That makes me feel very young. So I was asked today to talk a little bit about my background, a little bit about Northeastern University, for whom I am the Vice Provost for Research Development, and then a little bit about federal funding as we see it from the research side. So I will start off by just saying that I also came from a research background. I was in biomedical sciences at Cornell University. And I am one of those people that sort of left bench science because of the uncertainty in terms of federal funding. I had federal grants of my own. I had a faculty position at an Ivy League institution and left bench science just because I saw my colleagues and the environment and the stress of getting federal funding and competing for those federal dollars. So I know exactly how that feels from a researcher's perspective. In terms of research development, we work across our university with research faculty every day to identify and pursue sponsored funding opportunities, and the majority of those are from the federal government. So just a real high-level overview of Northeastern. So we are a global university system headquartered in Boston, Massachusetts. We are at about 185 million in external research awards as of last year, but we hopefully will blow past that this year. I know we will. So we're really in a growth phase at Northeastern. We have 21,000 undergraduate students, about 16,000 full and part-time graduate students. That includes master's and PhD level students. We have 10 colleges, 10 global campuses, the majority of which are in the domestic United States, and 10 multidisciplinary research institutes at Northeastern. Our research growth over the past 20-ish years has really been truly unprecedented for an institution of our size. We achieved R1 status in 2015, and you can see from this graph that our research expenditures have grown exponentially since 2001, so in the last 20-odd years. We've really grown as an institution. Coupled with that, we have really invested in our research faculty hiring, and you can see that our cumulative faculty hire has reached 700 over the past year in 2020. And so we're really investing in that research ecosystem and in workforce and STEM workforce development particularly. If we tie that into the federal research and development budget as we see it, so this is from the National Science Foundation numbers, the federal budget for research and development really has remained somewhat flat over that same time period, over about the past 15, 20 years. You can see that in the 90s and early 2000s, there was an enormous increase in federal R&D dollars, and that has kind of flattened off over the past 15 years. So it's really sort of at odds with our growth as a university, but also other academic institutions' growth. And I just want to talk a little bit about the career trajectory of research faculty in the basic STEM sciences. And this can differ somewhat in terms of the positions that faculty take and their career trajectory. But this is often the standard career path for basic research faculty. So we start out with folks who are at the assistant professor level. You know, they've either just graduated or they've just done a postdoctoral position. They may have small lab groups. They may only have a couple of research students, graduate students, or postdocs on their staff. They're really trying hard to compete for money. They don't have that track record of funding, and so they're really scrapping for a lot of research competition. There's a lot of research competition for these dollars, and they are participating in highly competitive early career grant programs. And so if they are lucky enough to win those programs, they get those grants, but it's very competitive, and they basically don't sleep, and they work really hard to get the grants that they need at that early phase of their career. Assistant professors, all academic faculty, but assistant professors most specifically are judged on their performance in terms of publications and number of grants they've received. And so they're really under pressure to get federal dollars, particularly at that stage in their career. Once we get to the associate level, the associate professor level, they've achieved tenure, so they usually have a job for life, so we say, but they also have usually grown out their research group to a larger size. They have more people to support. They need to get more grants to support those people, and the expectation for their output and their productivity is increased. They also may start to sort of think about ways to leverage some of their individual grants into team grants, and start to think about how they can go after more consolidated funding. Then they may get promoted to a full professor position. Many full professors have large research groups. They may have 15 or 20 people in their research groups, and they're training high numbers of trainees to enter the STEM workforce. This means that their pressure for dollars is even further increased. They have to bring in these sort of large pirate chests of funding, and they need to also make sure that they are thinking about large programs such as center grants or others that are really multidisciplinary and involve a lot of moving parts and people. They're also at this stage much more competitive for commercializing, bringing IP to market, generating a huge workforce or a huge cadre of trainees to join the STEM workforce from their labs and from these large programs that they're joining. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Northeastern's particular research themes, but I'm also going to tie in some ways that basic research has really helped in commercialization and development and workforce development. So Northeastern has three main research themes. We have health, security, and sustainability. Everything that we do has to be tied into one of those research themes, and there has to be a human component to everything. So we want to think about the ways that technology may interface with the human being in the loop. All of our research is highly interdisciplinary. We work across all disciplines and actually try and break those disciplines down so that there are no barriers to collaboration. We also want to make sure that our research has a huge global impact and is really changing the lives of people that are affected by those global challenges. We also work in partnership, and partnership is a huge piece of our research, whether that is with industry, nonprofits, government sources. We like to partner with folks to really bring those challenges to bear. If I focus on the first theme of our research, so Northeastern faculty collaborate across disciplines to develop innovations in the health space, and these can be related to developing novel cancer diagnoses, creating new cures for infectious diseases, discovering new drugs and drug delivery systems, or creating safe and effective painkillers that are alternatives to opioids, and we all are aware of the opioid crisis in this country currently. I want to also give kind of a broader example of how health-related basic research has really benefited the nation. And that, of course, is through the COVID-19 pandemic. You know, when those mRNA vaccines came out, everybody said, oh, we can't trust those vaccines. They're too new. They've been developed over the past 3 months. How can they possibly have developed something so fast? They didn't, is the short answer to this question. The first research into lipid structures that were actually used to protect mRNA vaccines from degradation in human systems was performed in the 1980s. mRNA vaccination was really thought of through the 90s and early 2000s, and that technology started to be used then. And then we come, to the COVID-19 pandemic, we have 40 years of basic research at our backs to develop those mRNA vaccines. And it was some very, very wonderful, clever people in STEM that actually, made that breakthrough, but there was, 40 years of basic research behind them. Security is our second theme, and Northeastern faculty collaborate across disciplines in this space to really think about secure devices, systems, and networks across the Internet of Things, particularly in the communications world. We detect and combat cyber threats. We provide our military and homeland security teams with advanced materials and technologies to keep the world secure. And we enhance the preparedness and resilience of our systems and communities. And one example of the way that basic science can really impact global problems, and the US in particular, is one that we are all too familiar with, and we've seen this recently and over the past several years, this has been an increasing problem, is the threat of violence against what we call soft targets. So folks that convene are generally unarmed and do not have the protection of what we call hard targets, which are usually military protected spaces. Northeastern.
I'm sorry, Kim. Hi. Because we got our start a little bit late, I think we do need to move on to the next speaker. So if you could just,
sure.
Thank you. If you want to finish up the last remark before. Sorry.
I just had another. I just was making the point about how basic research is really needed to make huge advances that are of huge benefit to the United States in many different ways.
Thank you. I'm so sorry, but I know we do have to. Everybody has to compress their talking points a little bit, just because we need to. I know we need to make up for some of that lost time. So I'd like to move now to Adam to make your remarks, and if we can keep them kind of short, we can then get a little bit of time in for Q&A. Thanks.
Sure, sounds good. Hi, everyone. My name is Adam Kinnear. I'm a doctoral candidate at Marquette University in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, studying how aggregating amyloidogenetic protein affects protein homeostasis. I'll skip the details on the work I'm doing because if you'd like to know more about it, you can go check out my video at the Funded Forward Student Video Challenge, of which I was a finalist. So after this event, feel free to check that out. I don't have slides for you, so this is going to be roughly 6 minutes of me talking to you. You get to see me the whole time. I'm sorry. But my work is being funded by an NIH grant. So I've gotten to experience what research and training can be like when resources are available to you, which is excellent considering the non-traditional approach I've taken to get into my program. I've lived in Wisconsin my entire life. I grew up in a small town that provided a safe yet kind of sheltered environment for me to grow up in. Outside the classroom and a few childhood toys, I didn't have much exposure to scientific research and discovery. Science was a class in school that described how the world worked, and it was usually presented in a retrospective study. So this is what happened and this is why. It was considered a core subject, but life was going to happen whether you knew about science or not. So it wasn't really that applicable to the success of your day. Research was either a tedious thing that you did for a grade, or it was a thing that other people did out there in the big wide world that yielded in these landmark discoveries. I did learn about researchers from smaller towns or more cloistered environments, but they were typically people who had quote unquote real jobs who just did science kind of off on the side. So for me, the concept of scientific research was more fantastical than practical. Therefore, I didn't find research relatable to the small notion of the world where I grew up, and I never really considered it as a viable career. After high school, I went to college and I got familiar with the concept of developing a career-related skill set. Science, in particular, freshwater ecology, was relatable to the world that I grew up, so I felt comfortable studying it. Every so often, I got to tour a funded professor's laboratory or step onto an active field site and participate in the research. And being invited into these experiences affirmed the idea that a career could be built off of research. And being there gave me firsthand experience in seeing that it could be done. You can try to convince someone that an idea is possible, but it isn't until you provide them with evidence that it makes that idea tangible. Unfortunately, by the time I graduated in 2009, the financial crisis was in full swing, and the idea of job prospects looked rather bleak. And let's be fair, full disclosure, I had no idea what I was doing when I got out into the real world. Undergraduate study can be great for discovering who you are and what you want out of life, but without decent mentorship, there are just some lessons that you have to take the extra time to learn and discover for yourself. Unfortunately, I did not have that mentorship. What I did know is I knew I needed to get a job, and I knew I needed to start making money. So I made the choice to go back and get extra training in biomedical laboratory sciences, and I got set up with a career working in clinical and diagnostic laboratories. I worked these jobs for the next 7 years and grew to appreciate the physical and mental emotional well-being that's associated with a steady paycheck. However, I still felt professionally unfulfilled, and I craved a deeper understanding of the work I was doing. So during this time, I started applying for higher education. When I got accepted to Marquette, I knew that pursuing a PhD meant I had to say goodbye to some of the comforts of work-life balance. But by that point, the choice for me was simple. Currently, I am well past the midpoint of my program, I hope, and I can look back with the benefit of hindsight and identify the aspects of my training that I think had the greatest positive impact to me. So for starters, I got to experience creating and designing my own research. And this is starting from the ground up. So I got embedded in the unknown literature. I developed a topic, I designed my experiments, and I collected all the data. Writing these results into a manuscript relates these intangible ideas that I had in the beginning to some sort of a relatable model. And I get to experience this because my lab is funded. I get to focus on my own scientific growth and my own development because I don't have to worry about furthering my PI's ideas. I get to have greater flexibility and creativity in my design, even when it comes with its own set of dangers. Part of a successful program is incorporating how to deal with distracting ideas or conclusions. And the best way to recognize these rabbit holes is to have someone there to guide you. I get to have strong mentorship, not just because my PI is an amazing scientist, but because being funded gives her the capacity and the time to spend time training me. That training doesn't just come overnight or even after a single year. It comes from learning to be resilient and constantly repeating attempts at failed experiments, manuscript drafts, research presentations, and things like that. If you want to keep practicing something, you need to have the basic materials as well as the opportunities to do so. So what's next for me? After I finish my program, I know that I'm stepping out into a very dynamic job market. I know that we're still feeling the economic effects of the world events, being the global pandemic or otherwise. And I am aware that applying for research aid is still highly competitive. I'm going to need to stay flexible and open-minded about what my career is going to entail. But ideally, if I can advocate for research funding now, a research-focused career will be that much more attainable for me and for others just like me in my position. That's all I got for you.
Wonderful, thank you. I think we'll have time for 1 or 2 questions before we move on to our second panel. And so I will kick that off with one question, and then if there are any in the chat, I will have a check. If not, I could always ask the second one. But so I'm just going to pick up on what Adam was talking about just now about coming from different backgrounds into STEM research and into pursuing that as a career, first as a degree and as a career. And we know that according to the NSF's Science and Engineering Indicators report, women represent just 1/3 of the STEM workforce. Underrepresented racial and ethnic groups represent just over 1/5. And we know that there is a wide variation in sort of the geography of innovation, of where people have the experience and then sort of understand what a science career might look like, and where people come from maybe the background that Adam, you were describing as being less familiar with that and kind of having to find your own way and needing mentors and really and whether or not that presents barriers for some people to even think about pursuing a science career. So what, in your view, and I'll turn to each of you in turn, what systemic changes need to be made at universities or research agencies to help move that needle, to make science education and careers more accessible to a wider variety of people? Because it seems like the efforts that we've been making for the last decade or two in thinking about this have not been enough. So maybe I'll pass it to Kim first, and then I'll take it to Adam. So if you can sort of keep your answer sort of pithy, that'd be great. Thanks.
I think genuine engagement with the communities is huge. I've been working on a huge proposal with a faculty member that is very invested in that engagement, and it has to be done holistically across the board, in many different ways and at many different levels. And academic institutions really need to start thinking more seriously about that holistic engagement and really being all in on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and it not just being sort of a lip service to get federal funding.
Adam?
Science is all about nurturing. Being successful in science, you gotta have the right hype squad with you to really push you along. It's one thing to say, hey, I'm not going to say anything. I'm going to make space for someone to say their thing so underrepresented voices can say something. It's another thing to say, hey, I'm not going to say anything now, and I'm still going to try to make this environment safe for them. So they not only feel safe to say something, but they feel empowered. They feel educated. They know the context of the situation in which they're in, and it allows them to be successful and thrive.
It's fantastic. So I think what we'll do is we'll move to the second set of panelists, but I would like everybody to stick around so we could do another Q&A with everybody together at the end, from the audience or from us at the end. So that would be, so thank you very much for your remarks. Thanks for joining us today. And I'm going to move to the second panel with Dr. Prasad Mohapatra, Vice Chancellor for Research at UC Davis, and Dr. Alex Dvertai. Could you pronounce your name for me, actually? Quick.
You're correct. It's Dvertai.
Dvertai, thank you very much. Project Manager Team Lead at ABCAM, University of Oregon, to discuss the next phase in a researcher's career, entering the workforce. So I'll start with Dr. Mohapatra for some introductory remarks, and then we'll hand it off to Alex. Thanks.
Thanks, thanks, Reva. And it's my pleasure to be over here. As Reva said, I serve as the Vice Chancellor for Research at UC Davis, and we are closing into a research enterprise of about $1 billion per year in external research. But I'm not going to talk much about the research at UC Davis, but I'll focus more in terms of the research workforce at the national level. US economy is tightly bound to advances in science and technology, which in turn leverages the outcome of the research efforts. The research funded by federal agencies thus have a tremendous impact on the economy of the nation. In addition to the innovative solutions and products, federal research helps in creating a very important and unique category of workforce that is unparalleled anywhere in the world. The workforce developed through research has a cascading impact on the national economy and the advances all over the world. On the global stage, the US share in research and development has been shrinking. In the year 2000, nearly 40 cents of each dollar used for research and development was spent in US. By 2017, that number has dropped down to 25 cents. We probably need to double down on that now to regain the national strength in this domain to maintain the global leadership in addressing and impacting the quality of human life. The country needs to do a better job in attracting women, racial and ethnic minorities, and rural Americans to the US scientific and technical workforce. Diversity is important in boosting innovation and productivity. One way to achieve that goal is to expand opportunities for students from those groups, and it is well known to have a high impact for workforce strengthening in the context of diversification. US must significantly increase the number of qualified high school STEM teachers who are critical in creating the 21st century workforce needed to maintain the American leadership. Focus on high school would help in establishing the foundation of pipeline that can be leveraged in subsequent stages. Pre-college stages are ideal for making significant impact on the career of young minds and influencing them towards STEM discipline. In the context of leveraging the research workforce, we also need to look at the international domain. Our immigration policies should attract international talent to bolster the STEM workforce and strengthen the national science and technology enterprise. We need to allow international students to stay in the US after graduation and provide them a clear path to permanent residency. Addressing issues related to both domestic and international students is essential in getting the nation back on a solid footing as science and technology global leader. The other aspect is most short-term benefits for research workforce are realized by industry, both large and small. We now have multiple trillion-dollar businesses who are and can team up and collaborate with the government and the universities for producing more and better STEM researchers. This in turn will further benefit the entire ecosystem of the industry. Another aspect to realize is to identify a small set of critical fields where we need to prioritize. Again, this will be a very practical and doable path. The identification of these critical fields will depend on national needs, global impacts, and our preparedness for future demands. Last but not the least, we need to shape the future of work and workspaces. Leveraging the advances in technology, we have to consider increasing the efficiency and effectiveness of workers without affecting the quality of their lives. Workplaces are evolving at a faster rate, especially due to the lessons learned during the pandemic. Beyond the hybrid work culture, we should explore creating positive and facilitating workspaces that will enhance the mental health of workers. So in summary, I touched upon the following 5 aspects of building US research workforce: broadening participation, creation of STEM pipeline, partnering with industry, developing skills in critical fields, and shaping the future of work and workspaces. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those comments. And now I'll turn to Dr. Devartai.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for your time here. I'm going to also try to make my remarks a little bit shorter, so just bear with me. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself and where I've come from before I land on where I'm at now. So I have been a recipient throughout my entire career of federal research funding. So I understand and have been personally impacted by how it works within our system. So I have an undergraduate degree that's a bachelor's in biology and a minor in chemistry from a small liberal arts college called Barry University in Miami Shores, Florida. My research career is partly and actually entirely in fault to my undergraduate research advisor who totally tricked me into doing science. I had no desire to be a researcher. I was excited about science and I said I was going to be a doctor because for a brown girl who grew up in a different country, that's what people tell you to do when you like science. They tell you that if you like science, you should go into the medical field. Nobody in my family knew anything about research, and that is very similar to the rest of my students, but we'll talk about that later. So my undergraduate advisor was like, Alex, you asked really great questions, and I really think you should be a scientist. And I was like, we'll see. And then there were these programs that my institution had that were funded by the National Institute of Health. And there was one program that we had grants to called RISE. So it's Research Initiative for Scientific Enhancement. And the other program that we have was called MARC. So it's a Minority Access to Research Careers Grants. And I was a part of both of those programs throughout my undergraduate career. And that provided me with the opportunity to not just facilitate research at a small liberal arts college, but to actually do summer internships at research across the country. So I've had a chance to do research in a HIV infectious disease lab at Vanderbilt. I worked in a computational genetics lab. I basically got a chance to experience science outside of my hometown. And then I decided that I liked it. And then I went on to the University of Oregon to pursue a PhD. And like I said, I grew up in South Florida. The demographic in South Florida is very different than the demographic in Oregon. So that was both a far, like in terms of distance shock and also a culture shock. When I first started at the University of Oregon in my program, I was not only the only person of color on my floor, but there were no other women who were on my floor for me to look at who were scientists, and there weren't any other people of color that were in my same field. So I went from practicing research in an environment where diversity was the norm because of the homogeny of the place that I lived, to now doing something that I love to do, that I felt really confident doing in a place where there was nobody that looked like me. And so I had a conversation with my PI at the time, and I was like, hey, we need to fix this. Why am I not seeing, as part of your PhD track, you have to teach classes when you're going to a teaching institution? and I was teaching classes and I didn't see underrepresented minority students. And I was like, this doesn't make sense. What's the problem here? How do we fix it? So we built a program at the University of Oregon called SCORE, and it was a program that was designed to help underrepresented minorities continue through science. And so we did that, and the program is still successful. And I'm happy to say that upon me leaving, we actually do have another woman in our same department who's also another person of color. And that for me was really impactful for the rest of the students, because you can't be somebody that you can't see. And so for me, that in addition to all of the other things about being a woman and being an underrepresented minority and doing science that's already hard, to do it in a space where you are, the fact that you're an other is sort of echoed by the fact that there's no one that looks like you, increases a lot of those challenges. And then when I graduated from the University of Oregon, I started working for the company that I work for now. We're called Abcam. Abcam is a global company, and overall we manufacture antibodies. And so just to give you a little bit of reference, antibodies are the tools that are in the COVID test kits that you guys will get. So like lateral flow assays, and our primary customers are academics, so students like myself who are in research labs who are doing research, and also pharmaceutical companies who are building some of these devices and doing other things. And so one of the things that I really want to, or one of the points that I really want to drive home is that industry doesn't work without academia, and academia doesn't work without industry. We are two parts of the same coin, and we rely on each other to do things. And so the skill sets and the basic research and all the things that I've done throughout my career have been really impactful for me here, but they also help me to develop intellectual property from a business perspective that makes it easier for scientists who are going to be coming into other roles to do their job. And the goal is to allow research to continue to happen faster and faster, so that we can have these advances like the vaccine for COVID when we need to, so that it's there. So that's just sort of like the big picture of my sort of career trajectory in science and how research funding is really important to that. And I'll just sort of leave it there.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you both for those remarks. And I will lead off again with a question and see if there's anybody who, and just to echo what Peter put into the chat, if anybody who's listening and in the audience would like to put in a chat, please feel free to use the chat function or the Q&A function to submit a question. So you both touched on kind of the need to, very extensively, the need to diversify and bring in people from different backgrounds, whether it's domestic or international, into the research enterprise. And so how, in your experience, and I'll turn to each of you in turn, what are the barriers to pursuing STEM, to choosing a STEM degree and to pursuing a STEM degree and to persisting in them, particularly for maybe groups that are underrepresented in science and engineering? And what can universities and research agencies do both to help remove those barriers? So I'll turn to Dr. Mohapatra first for that.
No, I think that's an excellent question, and I think Alex touched upon that a bit. In many of the underrepresented groups, the lack of role models. So having role models, starting both from high school and then moving on to college, would be something that is very important to create and facilitate, because without seeing role models, these younger minds, they don't try to relate their presence in a profession if they see people of other kinds are there. So that's not very welcoming environment. So one thing we need to focus more on is create that welcoming environment. And the best thing of creating a welcoming environment is to have role models. And not only that, these role models should be very passionate about, supporting and making others feel welcoming to that area. Alex can follow up on that.
Sure, I'd love to talk about that. I can talk about that all day. I think that it's really important. I mean, there are two facts to this. The first that I brought up, which is knowledge, right? And understanding that when you come from a certain culture, there's a lack of understanding about what type of opportunities there are for you in science. And so through the creation of SCORE from an academic perspective, and I'm working with AdCam to create internships for underrepresented minorities here in the biotech space so they can get a feel for what that is sooner, are really important. Number two, registering that it's not just about what you can do to attract diverse candidates, what are you doing to retain them? So when I express to you that I am the only female and the only person of color for 7 years that works on a floor that does something that's really hard, that environment is not designed for me to be successful. I was successful in spite of that environment, but the way that environment was designed was not for me to be successful. And it is unfair, I feel, to ask other people to have the same expectations that everybody's going to be able to navigate that space in the same way. And so a big part of it is, what are we doing to make these situations comfortable for the minorities? Because one of the things that we talk about all the time is how diversity, equity, and inclusion drives research and it drives innovation, right? And that's what you want. But if you do not allow the diversity that sits within your institution or within your business to feel comfortable enough, then you're not really benefiting from any of that diversity, because it's there, but the environment is not such that it will be successful or flourish or maintain. Another thing is that sometimes you need a different eye to be able to recruit a diverse candidate. And sometimes, from what I've seen, the legislation or sometimes the people who are thinking about these things don't always have the outside perspective. And so it's about knowing who to go to ask the right questions so that you can design the programs that are going to be successful for those types of students. So one example is that underrepresented minorities typically tend to like more instruction or feedback or mentorship than maybe more traditional students. Like, they feel more comfortable and they just want to be given an opportunity to demonstrate that they can be successful or not. And so some of these things are learning differences, understanding how, because everybody learns differently, but just paying attention to those things across different cultural barriers is really important. And supporting the people that you have. Like, so just to give you like a point of reference, my previous graduate advisor is now the provost of the University of Oregon. He's been a faculty member there for, I would say, over 20 years. I could be incorrect, but really long time. I was the first, and to this point, the only African-American woman student that he's graduated from his program from. And that for me was kind of huge to know that, right? That there hasn't been very many people that look like me that have even gotten to the point that I've gotten to, and then been able to follow through and to finish. So understanding what that experience might be like, and trying to create an environment that makes it that, you don't leave this experience and then feel jaded. That's one of the key things. You want people who are passionate and excited to drive these things, because it does take work and it takes commitment. And just like Kim said earlier, we don't want lip service anymore. We need people to get on the floor and do the work and continue to do it to allow it to be sustainable. And that doesn't happen without funding.
So let me just pick up on that and pull up one of the questions for the chat. And I'm going to popcorn this one over to Kim, actually, since Alex just did a nice thing to call that out. And this is very much following up on this conversation. What are the specific steps that department leaders and university leaders have done or can do to fix the issues around having climates in STEM that are not welcoming to women, to members of the underrepresented groups, to people from backgrounds that are less familiar with science? And also as part of that, how do we track progress to ensure that accountability? So let me send that on over to Kim.
Sure. I have several thoughts. So funding is a huge carrot, and the NSF has really been at the forefront of funding tied into diversity, equity, and inclusion and broader impacts. It's one of the two, review criteria that NSF reviews every grant. They have very specific funding tied to those types of programs, but equally they expect these threads to be weaved through every single proposal that comes through their door. And it's extremely explicit that you have to call these out in the proposal, and it has to be a genuine engagement. It's no mistake that NSF puts these measures in place and these review criteria in place, and all of a sudden the universities start popping up offices of inclusion, or they have to do that to be competitive for this funding. And so if you have to put your money where your mouth is and make sure that people are doing this type of work in order to receive federal funds. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, I said we have to be intentional, and at the university and other institute levels, we have to be very intentional about the way that we incorporate diversity, equity, and inclusion into our everyday lives, into our programming. So folks have to stand up and say when they're not comfortable with something not having that lens. If somebody's organizing an event and they're just inviting all of their friends and they're a white male and all the people they invite are also white males, there's a problem there, and we have to feel safe enough in the academic environment to stand up and say that there's a problem there. And I think that environment is getting to that stage where we can do that. Equally, the universities have to invest in diversity, equity, and inclusion in a big way. I can speak from sort of the standpoint of Northeastern that we have a chief inclusion officer at the university, and he's at the vice provost level. He reports into our president. We also have associate deans for diversity, equity, and inclusion in every one of our colleges, and there are multiple levels of that all the way down the institution. And people now are starting to take it very seriously and really responding to these efforts in a serious way. And that's the only way that we're going to do it. We can't, as Alex said, we can't do this lip service anymore. We have to actually put our money where our mouth is and take these efforts seriously.
Actually, I'm just going to follow up. So Adam, if you would want to chime in on how does that look for getting folks from say rural or other or geographies that are not necessarily backgrounds where people are tied into or have a lot of experience with STEM? What can we do in that space as well to take steps to diversify in along that dimension?
I cannot support enough the idea of giving people mentorship, proper mentorship, to elevate them and make them feel supported, make them feel ready for whatever they want to take next. Role models, I love the idea of role models. I'm nervous about the idea of just giving somebody a role model because it's something you look at and there's no connection there. I feel that you have to have that connection with your mentor, that mentor-mentee connection, to pull your mentee, pull the greatness out of them, answer the questions, recognize the rabbit holes, really thrive. Yeah.
So I'll just one more question out of the chat that was directed for Dr. Mohapatra, which was to ask about if you could please expand on your point about saving work and workspace.
Actually, I meant shaping work and work.
Shaping.
Yeah. So
right.
The whole idea of that is, we are in an inflection point where we are changing our work environment. And if we think about most of the hybrid work environment, then the concept of work-life balance probably changes to work-life integration. You share the same workspace for working as well as for your personal life. And that will have an impact on how we develop our culture in terms of working. The other aspect is providing good workspace. We need to make sure that the workspace are more, I don't mean to say comfortable, are more exciting to work forward. Mental health is becoming a big issue, and the environment that we work in, that does play a role in impacting mental health. So we need to, with these changes, we need to make sure that the work as well as workspace, need to be shaped in a way that will meet the demands of the future. And in that aspect, we probably need to think about leveraging technology more than what we have been leveraging in enhancing the effectiveness and efficiency of our work.
So I'll just add one more question before we wind up for, I think, so that we can wind up on time, which is, how do we think about, would like to hear anybody's thoughts on making the choice of going into a STEM degree and then career, especially the degree and training stage, a sustainable one. We know there are the demands on the money that's coming from the federal government to fund research has to cover both the cost of the research and the cost of the people that are doing that research. And there is a tension between wanting to, and Kim, I think you alluded to this in the career trajectory of a faculty member, kind of wanting to have many mentees and many people in your, kind of working on your stuff, but yet also making the choice of going into a long-term, training period for a STEM degree sustainable for people from backgrounds that might not have a lot of personal resources. So how do you handle that? How do you see going forward that handling those competing demands on the budgets that are coming out of you might be getting from your federal research dollars? So I'll start with Kim, and then maybe Dr. Mohapatra, you want to go on after that.
And I think this is a fantastic question, and one that we've been thinking about at Northeastern. With every federal grant we receive overhead money, and I want to see institutions start to put some of that overhead money towards wraparound services that may help folks from non-traditional backgrounds partake in graduate programs at the same level that people that have maybe more traditional opportunity to do so. I would love to see those investments made. I would also like to see the training perhaps going out to those communities. We talked about rural communities that potentially don't have access to a large research university on their doorstep. And so we want to think about how we can get out to those communities and really pull them into the STEM workforce in one way or another. And that might be entering the workforce in a traditional technical role and working while they achieve a graduate degree. And, that's what we're all about at Northeastern, is experiential training. So I think that kind of a model could be where we're going in the future.
Anybody, Dr. Mohapatra, you want to chime in, and then we'll wind up to make that on time?
I will be short. So we have a project ongoing called Aggie Square. Aggie is our mascot. It's a collaborative project, which is a partnership between the state government, federal government, and the regional companies, along with the university, to build an ecosystem. It's a physical location also. We're building an ecosystem with the goal of enhancing and impacting the regional economy through skilling and upskilling of the workforce. And it is a very comprehensive project. And since it involves capital investment, it's huge also. So this will have a tremendous impact on the regional economy over here. I would strongly encourage people to look up an Aggie Square project, which has a lot of the features that you brought up, Reba.
Well, wonderful. So I know we're just 1 minute over, and so I think unless Peter has something to say, I think we'll get winded up. But I would like to thank everybody for joining us today and to discuss the importance of federal investment in scientific research to build a strong research workforce pathways. We look forward to interacting with you all in the future. Peter, do you have any closing remarks?
Just a huge thank you to our panelists, and an enormous thank you to you, Reba, for moderating today.
Great. Well, thank you very much. And that concludes our seminar today. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.